sweet friends, I'm Mary from marysnest.com, and here on my YouTube channel I share traditional recipes for making nutrient-dense foods using simple ingredients. And today I'm going to show you how to make homemade sauerkraut. It's a wonderful probiotic-rich side dish. Today for making this homemade sauerkraut, I'm going to be using green cabbage, but you can also use red cabbage. Well, now before we get started, I just want to say if you're new to my channel, welcome. And if you like learning more about traditional foods cooking, please subscribe to my channel and click on the little notification bell below, and that'll let you know each time I upload a new video. Alrighty, let's get started. First, I want to discuss this green cabbage. This is organic, and I believe it was about $2.99. But if organic is not in your price range, don't worry. You can buy non-organic cabbage and simply remove some of the outer leaves and discard those, put them in the compost pile or whatever you want to do with them, and follow through with the same directions that we're going to do today in making this sauerkraut. Now the first thing that we want to do is remove some of these leaves. These outer leaves. We're not going to discard them unless, as I said, if your cabbage is not organic, you can discard the first two leaves maybe, but if it's organic, save the first few leaves that we remove and put them aside, and I'll explain to you what we're going to do with those later. And if your cabbage is non-organic, just take off the first two, discard those, and then take off another two and put those aside and save those. And I'll show you how we're going to use those in a little bit. Alrighty, well, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take another leaf off of this cabbage, and then I'll show you where we go from there. Well, I've got my two big leaves to the side that I've set over there to save, and now what I'm going to do is cut this right down the middle. Any way you do it is fine. What we're going to do is remove the core. So how we're going to do that is just put it flat like that to make it easier for you. You can certainly do it like this, but it's a little more wobbly, so I like to always put it flat side down, basically give it feet and make it a little easier to do. And then you'll see the core is right here, so we're just going to cut in, just making a V shape, and we're going to pull that core out. Now, don't discard this. Put this aside because we're going to grind that up, and we're also going to add that into our homemade sauerkraut, because this is going to be very rich when it comes to making the probiotics that'll start to multiply in the homemade sauerkraut. Well, I've removed the core from the cabbage. As you see, that's gone. And now what I'm going to do is just cut it in half again, and half over here, and then I'm just going to begin to shred it. And how you'll do that, and we'll just move this to the side, is just cut it as thinly as you can, just like that. Very similar to if you were making coleslaw. And just continue on down, cutting it until you're all finished. Just getting some nice thin pieces or slices. Well, I've got all my cabbage sliced up, and now I'm going to transfer it to this glass bowl. Any bowl you have will work fine. I normally use a stainless steel bowl for the next step, but I wanted to put it in a glass bowl so you could see what I was doing. Well, I'll continue to get all this in here, and then when I've got it all in, I'll bring you back. Well, I've got all the sliced cabbage in the bowl, and now what I'm going to do is add 2 tablespoons of coarse ground sea salt. It's a very coarse ground, as hopefully you can see this. It's very large grains to the salt. And I like to use this salt. This is a gray Celtic sea salt. It has a little bit of a wet feel to it, and it's as I said, the coarse ground, and we're just going to sprinkle that right on top. And then the next step is the fun part. We're going to start mashing this down and mixing it with the salt and help the cabbage release some of its juices. Now, I've got a kraut pounder. I love this thing, and this was given to me many years ago as a gift, and it's just been a wonderful helper when it comes to making sauerkraut. And all you're going to want to do is do like this. And we'll continue doing that, but in case you don't have this, I don't want you to worry. You can use a metal potato masher, you can use a plastic potato masher, that'll do the trick. If you don't have either of those, no problem. You can use a soup, I forget what this is called, isn't that terrible? A soup ladle, and you can just do like that. And if you don't have that, don't worry. If all else fails, just use the back of a spoon. And you're just going to want to get in there and just smash. It's a little bit of a job, but it builds up muscles. So all we do is start pounding this down, mixing the salt into the cabbage, and the cabbage is going to start to release some of its juices, and it'll get waterier and waterier as we continue to do this. And this takes 5-10 minutes. It's not that long. And if you have any kids in the house, this is a good job for them. And just keep pounding it down. And when it's to the desired state that I want it to be, I'll show you and bring you back, and we'll put it in the jar. Well, I've got this about to where the consistency that I like it. And what I'm going to do now is just first I want to just get some of the cabbage off of that. And I want to show you, try to get a little closer to the camera. You'll see that the cabbage has softened a bit. It's mixed in all nicely. The salt is all dissolved, and it's starting to release some of its juices, the cabbage juices. So now what we do, we get a clean jar. This is a half-gallon mason jar. Now, I want to say a word about this. Some people, when they make this with 1 head of cabbage and 2 tablespoons of salt, will use a quart-sized jar and really pack it down good. And definitely packing it down good is important, and we'll discuss that in a minute to help it ferment properly. But I like to use a half-gallon jar because I like to make sure that I get a lot of sauerkraut juice, because sauerkraut juice is so rich in probiotics, better than any probiotic you could ever buy over the counter in a pill. And just to take about 2 ounces of the sauerkraut juice every day will do wonders for improving your gut health if you have any problems with digestion. And if you have healthy gut health, it'll just continue to keep your gut healthy. So I just wanted to share that's why I'm using a half-gallon jar. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put this in and load up this jar, and when it's all filled, I'll bring you back and I'll show you what our next step's going to be. Well, I've got all the cabbage in my jar, and now I'm going to take the kraut pounder and I'm just going to press and press and press. And as we do this, we're going to see that liquid is going to start to be released and start to come up and over the cabbage. And we're just going to keep doing that until we start to see even more liquid released than what was just in the bowl when we were getting it started. And I'm just going to keep doing this, and when I get some more liquid coming up to the top, I'll bring you back. Well, as you can see, the cabbage is releasing more and more liquid, and I'm just going to take this kraut pounder out and try to see if you can see that. See, the cabbage has released more liquid, and it's starting to soften beautifully. And now, the next step that we're going to do is what I like to think of as my secret ingredient. And let me set that up, and I'll bring you right back. Now, when I make sauerkraut, I like to add 1 apple to the mixture. And the reason is, this is an excellent source of pectin, and pectin is a terrific prebiotic, meaning that it helps feed the bacteria that create the probiotics. So this is always my little insurance policy, because some people, what I want to say is when they make sauerkraut, they may add the salt, but they may also add whey, which is very rich in probiotics. It's the byproduct that comes off of milk when you make yogurt, cottage cheese, kefir, so on and so forth, any of your cultured dairy. And if you add a 1/4 cup of whey, a little piece of cabbage on the outside of the jar, when you add a 1/4 cup of whey, you're almost guaranteeing that you've got plenty of probiotics already in the cabbage to help things really get started. But I don't like the taste. I like whey. I think it's wonderful, and I enjoy drinking it over ice or mixed with sparkling water. It's delightful. but I don't like I get the flavor in the sauerkraut, and I don't like it. So what I like to do is simply add the salt and then add a little insurance with the sweetness from the apple and its prebiotic nature and cabbage is a prebiotic as well, and hopefully together they really give a good boost to feed the bacteria and give it what it needs to get going and turn the cabbage into sauerkraut. And it's usually always worked for me, so I think it's a good trick. Well, I've washed and dried this apple, and I'm going to just cut it up. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the skin on. That's just fine. I'm just going to cut a little bit of the core out because I don't want the seeds. And then I'm just going to cut this up and put it in my blender. You'll see why we're putting it in the blender in a minute. And I'm going to continue cutting this up, and then I'm going to fill you in on why I saved the core of the cabbage. Now I just want to say a word about these apple cores. Don't throw them out. Put them aside, put them in a bag, put them in your fridge, and when you get a nice collection of these, you can make apple cider vinegar. You can even add some, apples that may be a little past their prime, whatever the case may be, or it can just be core scraps. You can add other fruit and make a fruit scrap vinegar mixture, which I have a video on, and I'll link to that so that you can watch that video as well. So don't throw these out, save them. And now, why did we keep the core? Well, the core of the cabbage. Well, it serves the same purpose that the apples do. This is very rich in prebiotics and will help additionally feed the good bacteria to help it grow and proliferate and make the cabbage a wonderful probiotic food. So don't throw out your core of the cabbage. Just chop it up. Just rough chop. It's not important what size it is, because as you see, I'm putting it in the blender for a reason. And I'll just continue to chop up this core. There we go. We're going to get that in there. Then what we're going to do is top this off with some spring water. Now you want to use spring water as opposed to tap water, because tap water will have chlorine in it, and that will interfere with the good bacteria as it's trying to proliferate and make the cabbage into sauerkraut and make it a wonderful probiotic rich side dish. Now, if you don't have a source of spring water, don't worry about it. You can use your tap water, just boil it and let it cool down to room temperature. You don't want it to be warm, and that will help some of the chlorine dissipate. You can also leave it overnight, and that'll help some of the chlorine to dissipate. So that hopefully gives you some options. Alrighty, well now I'm just going to pour in some water, just enough to cover. Not even 100% covered. We'll start with that, and we'll see how it works turning it into a slurry. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this started. And then when it's all swirled up into a nice slurry, I'll bring you back. Well, I've turned that apple and the core of the cabbage into a nice slurry, and now we're going to pour this right in with our sliced cabbage. Now I just want to point out, you'll see there are little red specks in here because I used a red apple. Many times I use a green apple, but it really doesn't matter, and it's just personal choice. If you don't like seeing the red specks, you can certainly use a green apple, but I had a red apple, so that's what I decided to use. So now I'm just going to go ahead and pour this right in over our cabbage. Excellent. Alrighty. And now let me just set this blender aside, and we're going to mix this up a little, press it down again with the kraut pounder, and I'll bring you back. Now all I'm going to do is just mix this in with the cabbage to hopefully get it nicely mixed and get ready to just finish it off, top it off with a little more water, and then I'll show you why we save those cabbage leaves. Well, I've got this nicely mixed together. Now I'm just going to set this fork aside. I'm going to go get my kraut pounder again, and we're going to give this some real, oh, look at that, see how the liquid's just really coming up now. It's beautiful. It's just released so much liquid along with what we added, and it's really going to be just wonderful, and we're going to get a lot of kraut juice out of this as well. And that's what I like, because I like to skim that off the top once the cabbage is turned into sauerkraut, as I had mentioned earlier, for drinking the kraut juice, which is very nutritious. Alrighty, well, I think that's good where we've gotten to that point, and now I want to share with you why we save those cabbage leaves. What we're going to do is take these cabbage leaves. You can break them up, fold them, whatever you need to do. The bottom line is you just need to get them into the jar and cover up the cabbage. So I'm just going to squeeze these in here like this and push those down right on top. I wanted to mention, make sure that your hands are clean when you're doing this, because you don't want to introduce any unhealthy bacteria. Alrighty, and I'm just going to do the same thing with this one. We're going to get that down. Perfect. And then we're going to push everything down, get everything submerged. And what's nice is those outer leaves also, much like the core, are also very high in prebiotics. So they add to the whole process of helping this culture beautifully and become nice and probiotic rich. Alrighty, now the next step is, I have another little trick. To weight this all down, all I use is a simple little 4-ounce jelly jar. These are canning jars that you use when you make jelly. You can usually find these at the grocery store and at other big box kind of stores. And all I do is simply put that right in there, and it just works as a weight to hold everything down and submerged under the liquid, because that's what you want to achieve. You want to keep everything submerged, because by keeping it submerged you prevent any bad bacteria forming mold, so on and so forth. Keep everything submerged under the liquid, under a weight, and you'll be able to produce a lovely sauerkraut. Now, there are other options if you want to use something different. There's a company that sells little glass weights and various little tops that you can put on to help with the fermentation process. All of that's wonderful. But I wanted to show, in terms of keeping this extremely budget friendly, I wanted to show very simple things that you can use, that you might even already have around your home for making sauerkraut. Alrighty, well, the next step now is we're going to want to get a canning ring and a canning top. And the reason that I like to use these is, as this ferments, it's going to become very fizzy. And I just find it easier to, again, I'm just going to make this, finger tight. And I find it easier to loosen this, let a little bit of the fizz out if necessary, and then retighten it. And then when I start seeing it really get nice and bubbly and the color is starting to change, I will take this top off, and I personally just find it easier, even though it might have really formed a seal at some point while it's fermenting. I find it a little easier and a little less intimidating to just take a little can opener and boop, pop it open, because sometimes it can become quite fizzy and build up a bit of pressure. So I find that if I'm just going to reach over and get the plastic lid. This lid I sometimes find almost can be a little nerve-wracking to open and go boom like that. So that's why I often don't use these. I prefer to use the little canning lids. But certainly you can, if this is what you have and you want to use this, that's fine. And when I have used these lids in the past, what I do is each day, I see it's bubbling, I let out a little air, tighten it again. Next day, let out a little air, tighten it again, to try to keep out as much oxygen as possible, but at the same time release some of the carbon dioxide that's made during the fermentation process. So I'm going to put the canning lid on and the canning ring, and as I said, just finger tight. And now I'm going to find a warm, cozy place in my kitchen to put this, where it can rest undisturbed, but at the same time where I can check on it every day and see how it's progressing. And It's really very variable. It depends at what time of year you're doing this and what the temperature is in your kitchen. But after a few days, what you can do is open it up. You know, as I said, and I will, if I see a lot of fizz, I will loosen it, let a little of the carbon dioxide out, and then put the lid back on, tighten it up again. But that also gives you a chance to take out your weight and give it a taste and see if it's to your liking. If it is, perfect. At that point, I will then remove the canning lid and I will transfer to one of these plastic lids and refrigerate it. And it's ready to eat. And that's pretty much it. It's such an easy probiotic-rich side dish to make that while cabbage is in season, buy it. Try to make up a couple of batches of this. Keep it in your refrigerator. It'll last a good 6 months, if it even lasts that long. Because I think everyone in your family, yourself and your friends and family, will definitely be enjoying it. It's got homemade sauerkraut has a wonderful flavor, and it's also much more healthy for you than what you could buy in the store in the can. Now I've just put the sauerkraut in the making over there to be undisturbed and to go ahead and begin the fermentation process. And I wanted to show you, this is a sauerkraut that I made a couple of weeks ago, and I have it in my fridge. And the longer that you keep it in your refrigerator, the more it will ferment. It's much slower than when at room temperature, but it will continue to ferment and get a little softer and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to show you when this was fermenting on my counter, and when I took it out and tasted it, I thought the consistency was good, little crunchier, more crunchy than what you would get in the can at the grocery store or in the jar at the grocery store. But I knew that it would continue to do a slow ferment in my fridge, and so I thought, well, I'll leave it in there, and then after a few weeks, I'll give it a taste and see how I like it. So I'll give this a taste right now. That is so good. And I think what's nice about homemade sauerkraut, this is not as tangy as often sauerkraut sometimes you get at the store. So that's a good thing, especially if you're feeding children. It's very flavorful, and the apple gives it a little bit of touch of sweetness. And this one I had used a green apple, so you don't see the little specks. Gives it just a little touch of sweetness. And you can also, if you like, you can add caraway seeds. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can even make international versions of homemade sauerkraut, like kimchi. There's so many variations, and definitely things that your friends and family will love, and at the same time be eating something that's very probiotic rich, very good for your health, very good for your gut health. For printable instructions on how to make this homemade sauerkraut, please visit my website, marysnest.com. And if you like this video, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to learn more about traditional foods cooking, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel and be sure to click on the notification bell below. That'll let you know each time I upload a new video. Well, that's all for today, but thank you so much for joining me here, and I look forward to having you join me again right here in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.